Alright, I'm just out this evening gathering a plant called horseweed. Horseweed is also known as fleabane and mare's tail. It makes a pretty fantastic hand drill spindle. Right now, gathered a good bit, probably 20-30 shoots, green and 2 or 3 dead, along with a couple juniper roots that I'm going to try out for fireboards. And I decided that, well, I may as well try to make a hand drill on the spot with materials I'm finding here and now. So that's what I'm doing. I've already, I know this area very well. It's a camp area near that huge field over there is where I gather my horseweed. There's also hemp and sunflower in that field. And then this over here is a big area with a ton of junipers and cottonwood trees, and then some oak. So I'm going to go and see if I can find another good juniper root to try with, find another good piece of horseweed for a spindle, and see if we can't make a on-the-spot hand drill set. I'm gonna have to pause and cut this video and stuff over and over as I'm doing stuff, so it might not be the most fluid thing ever, but I'm not a professional videographer, YouTuber, or anything, so I'm gonna do what I can with it. Alright, in my walking, to look for materials, I found a nice big rat snake. He's not going to hurt anything, so I'm just going to move along his way. If he wants to move, that is. And if not, then I'll go around him. Go on, bud. Keep on moving. No need to kill him. He's just part of this ecosystem. And like I said, he's non-venomous, so nothing to worry about anyway. This is his home. I'm not going to do anything to hurt him. Alright, and here among the brambles and thickets and thorn bushes and weeds and everything, I found one of my favorite wild edible plants. This is called wood sorrel, or oxalis. It, to me, tastes like the candy Starburst, or not Starburst, Sweet Tarts, or a very sour grape. This is a wonderful little edible plant. In this area, I'm standing in a big patch of it. I've never seen it grow this tall, so that's pretty cool. Onward to resources. I'm here at a big knockdown tree. I'm not 100% sure what kind of tree it is. Looks like it might be cottonwood. And there's a big piece of a root just right here, right in front of me. And that definitely feels like cottonwood. So I believe this is a big piece of cottonwood root. I have to be standing in a bunch of brambles to get to it, so hopefully it's a good one. Alright. Now, I dropped a few more pieces of older cottonwood root over here. And I'm recording all this on my phone, so sorry for any bad angles or wobbliness or whatever. I got a couple more pieces of cottonwood roots right here, along with a mullein stalk. Whew. Man, it's in the 90s right now and decent humidity, so I am dripping sweat. So I'm gonna head back to the Jeep. I've got some horseweed in there that I gathered here today anyway, so I'm just gonna use some of that, and we'll make us a hand drill set. We'll use bark off those cedars over there for our tinder bundle. And since my hands are full, I'm gonna just keep recording this, so I'll probably speed through it whenever I get to putting the video together. But it'll be nice to be in the shade, because man, it is hot. And that was a lot of bushwhacking just now through a lot of brambles. A lot of poison ivy too, which thankfully I'm not allergic to. But since my legs are all scratched up, it's possible that the oils from the poison ivy were able to enter my bloodstream. I don't know. It's possible. I don't know if it did or if that's even a thing, but... So, there's all that. I'm gonna grab a piece of horseweed out of the Jeep, and I'll show you guys how I process my hand drills. Alright, so I've got my materials here next to me. I don't know if you'll be able to see it on video, but I am absolutely sweaty, soaked in sweat. My shirt is a fair bit darker than normal. My legs are pretty scratched up from the brambles, but it's not really showing. But anyway, so processing spindles for a hand drill is going to be the first thing that I'm going to show. So this is a piece of dead horseweed. Let me grab a green one out of Jeep real quick to show for identification reasons. Alright, so this is a piece of green horseweed. It grows just upright, and when you find a stalk dead and dry, it'll look like this, much darker. This is one I found today as well. It's not perfect, so I'm not using this one for the video. So, anyway, processing. I'm looking at this stalk, trying to find the straightest section of it. Seems to start right around here. I'm going to beaver chew my way around the stick, meaning I'm going to make small cuts in one direction and then flip to the other to make it into a V. I'm going to do that all the way around the stick. And this is just a way to reduce material for a safer break. Safer meaning it's not just going to splinter all over and crack up your potential spindle. It's more controlled and easy to do. Gives you a pretty clean break at the end. Now, this one isn't necessarily great for length. About where these branches start is getting pretty thin. So I'm going to shave off a couple branches. That is a skinny spindle. You know what? I've got another piece in the Jeep that I might show instead. Just because the pieces that I have here next to me aren't really all that great. But I do have some in the Jeep that are better, that I did also gather here. So why not? Alright, so here's a piece. It's a decent length, not super long, not super short. It goes from fingertip to about elbow, which is a good length for a spindle. So I'm going to trim up the bottom to basically just a very rough, dull point. If you aren't familiar with the hand drill fire making technique, you want the bottom of your spindle to be the thicker end and the top to be the thinner end, essentially just to keep your hands moving down at a fairly decent speed and slowing out a little bit as it gets thicker. At least that's what they say. I don't really know how huge of a difference it makes. I've been making friction fires with hand drills and bow drills for about 5 or 6 years, and I've always done with the bottom down unless there was some reason to use the other end. Frankly though, I don't think it matters all that much as long as they're about equal. Anyway, so now I've got the bottom trimmed up. The top, I'm going to roughly trim. It doesn't have to be as neat. So, just trimmed up a bit. So, this spindle, like I said, is fingertip to elbow in length. Horseweed is pithy, meaning the center has a styrofoam-like material that is essentially just how the water gets passed from the roots up through the stalk of the plant. In this piece, the pith at the bottom right here is hollowed out already, which not a big deal either way. As I burn, I know there is pith a little bit deeper in, maybe a 1/4 inch. Probably get to that point anyway. Just with the friction of it, so not a huge deal. I like pithy spindles. There are other really good materials like seep willow that have a pith, but it's not a super soft pith, and so it's not going to wear away a little bit faster than the walls of the spindle, which is something you'll see with horseweed and other flower stalks. So, to finish processing this spindle, since I've got it trimmed to size and I have my ends cleaned up, I'm going to take the back of my knife, the spine, and it works better if your spine is sharpened, but it doesn't have to be super sharp. You're not scraping a ferro rod, you're just smoothing out a spindle. So I take the spindle and I hold it down in one place, and I'm scraping up and down the spindle with the spine of my knife. What this is doing is I'm smoothing out all these hard, sharp leaf nodes so that I'm not going to be beating up my hands as much as I'm using the spindle. You can use the edge of the knife as well. I prefer to preserve the edge, so I don't use it for scraping typically, but you can. Your knife, your rules, you do what you want. I'm not going to tell you not to, because it does work just fine. Typically, I like to scrape from the direction of growth, meaning if this is the bottom of the plant, I'll scrape from the bottom first, and then I go back from the top down. That just is a way that I found to ensure that my spindles are nice and smooth. You're not just going from one way and missing anything. Then I just run my hand up and down it, see if I find any sharp spots, rub them down, and then that is good to go. That spindle is ready to use. It's pretty freaking straight too, which for being an already dead stock, it's pretty nice. That's not a super common thing. Sorry, sweat's in my eyes. Alright, so now for our fireboard. I've got several pieces of cottonwood root, or what I suspect to be cottonwood root. This one is by far the best piece in terms of its age. For instance, I have this little one here, and you can see it's very dry and brittle looking, and it just snaps like absolutely nothing. So I know it's very soft, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. I prefer my spindle or my fireboards to be a little bit harder than that, at least a little bit harder to snap them, but it's not a big deal either way. But I'll probably use that piece for spindle plugs or something for a different project. So my challenge now, because I do want to use this piece, because like I said, this is the best one that I've got, is going to be reducing it to a more workable size. So to do that, because I didn't bring a saw, I've just got this Mora and one or two others in the Jeep, I'm going to be batoning a beaver chew. Same as what I was doing for the spindle, except I'm going to be hitting my knife with a heavier piece of wood to give it a little bit more mass. I don't recommend batoning on Moras. Most of them are not full tang and not really meant for the task. This one is their old wood carving junior model. I took off the finger guard and turned it into their old 2/0 model, and it actually is a full-length rat tail tang. And then the newer classic line that they have also have full-length rat tail tangs. So they're a little bit sturdier. Morse Kahansky and Cody Lundeen are two notable sources of educators that use Mora knives, or used in Morse's case, rest in peace Morse, used Mora knives and batoned them. So if that's any indicator, they can be pretty tough as long as you are using them within their limits. So I'm only going to baton as much as necessary for this. Cottonwood root is very soft, so it's not going to be like I'm batoning through a huge piece of oak or anything, though I am using a piece of oak for my baton. So I'm going to lay my knife on the root at a bit of an angle, and just start chopping it out. I'm going to go all the way around the root. All right, and that's actually pretty nice. The root just broke in half for me, which I'm perfectly okay with. So now that it's broken in half, I'm just going to baton it in half further so that I can carve out a couple boards from it. If this is a piece of cottonwood root, like I'm thinking, it's going to be really nice, because I can potentially get 2 boards out of this piece here, and then 2 out of the other half. Alright, so it just broke off 1 piece, so I'm just going to carve a flat spot real quick to test. Yeah, it cuts like cottonwood root. Now, I recently trimmed my nails, and so I don't really have much for this test, but a good way to test if a piece of wood will be good for friction fire is if you can make a dent in it with your fingernail or thumbnail. So just pressing in, don't know how visible it will be, but right here above my finger, right there, dented pretty easy. So that's a great sign. Because it broke off about halfway, I'm going to use the split off piece as a splitting anvil, basically. Same as you'd use a stump for splitting firewood. I'm going to go at it from the other side, see if I can make it split off to that same point. Move my knife a little bit. This piece is as big as I would be willing to try to baton down with this knife. This blade is only about 3 inches long. This piece is almost that same diameter. So I don't really have all that much material to work with, but I got it to split pretty nice. Now, because these pieces broke off how they did, I am not worried, but cautious about splitting the other side of this off how I was planning to. So instead, I'm going to go at about 1/3. And yeah, the grain's not as straight as I had thought it was, so it's not going to split as cleanly as I would like. So just have to carve this down, which, not a big deal. This is pretty much as good as it gets for a fireboard material, so I don't mind the extra effort. And it's cool, this piece of root, it definitely does look like cottonwood with the grain structure. It's very similar to other cottonwood roots I've had in the past. It's got really nice, pretty grain, which I like, just aesthetically. But yeah, I can already tell this one is going to be a really good fireboard. Now, something I've always struggled with is carving perfectly flat, plain surfaces, which your fireboard doesn't need to be perfectly flat by any means. Flat-ish, but not perfect. So, not a huge deal, but I forgot where I was going with that. I'm not great at carving a perfectly flat surface, but I'm going to do what I can to get it as flat as I can, so it's not wobbling or tipping or anything as I'm using it. That's probably where I was going with that thought originally. Now if I had a hatchet, I probably could have split the piece straight down the middle. But I don't have one with me right now. At least I don't think I do. No, my pack's not in the Jeep. So this is just working with what we've got. I've been using this knife for 2 years. It's a knife I use as a wilderness guide in Arizona. I'm very familiar with it, very comfortable with it. I know its limitations. And I'm perfectly fine using it for this process. So, like I said, it's definitely not perfectly flat and planed. But it'll work just fine. Yeah, put it on the ground just to test if there's any wobble. If there is, try to find where and carve that away to eliminate the wobble. That's pretty good. And like I said, just because it's not perfectly flat, there will always be a bit of wobble, but nothing really to concern myself with. This is definitely a nice piece for a fireboard though. Size-wise, density-wise, it's nice and wide so I can make holes up both sides. Yeah, I like this piece. So, it's funny, I've seen that tree a billion times and never thought to identify it, but yeah, I can now guarantee that, or almost guarantee that was cottonwood. So I'm going to clean up the edges, just because I like having nice square edges on my fireboard. It makes carving my notches just that much easier. Sometimes with my fireboards, I'll carve them to kind of a canoe shape, to basically where I just taper the ends to rounded points. But this one, because I didn't use any other tools and it still broke pretty cleanly, I'm just going to keep it like this, because I kind of like it. So, I've got my spindle, I've got my fireboard. I can use one of these chips as a cold catch. Probably use this one here. Right now I'm just carving it down to reduce the thickness of it. That way there's not much tilt with it being underneath the fireboard. Flattening off the bottom for the same reason. No wobble. So, cold catch. So the next step is going to be burning in a pilot hole. To do that, I'm going to take the tip of my knife and make a divot in my fireboard about 1/8 or 3/16 of an inch away from the edge of the board, making a hole about the same size as the tip of the spindle. About like that. So that's going to be just about perfect. Might be a little bit close to the edge of my fireboard, but it'll be fine. So now for the burn in. This is one of the more, I don't know, it's a good trial by fire for your set. If you can't get a good burn in, it's probably not going to work. So there's a few different stances that I can take for this. I'm just going to sit pretty much how I am now. I'm going to take off my sandals. Yeah, bushwhacking through brambles wearing Hirachi style sandals. Not necessarily the most comfortable thing ever, but I love my sandals, so I'm willing to make that sacrifice. So right now, I'm just going to warm up the set with some light passes. A little bit of squeakiness, doesn't hurt anything. It just means I'm not using enough pressure. So 2 light passes are done. Now I'm going to give it a couple good harder passes to burn in. And you can hear that squeak went away already. You can hear the spindle is now grinding with the fireboard. That's good. Alright, so I've got my spindle burned, and I've got my fireboard burned. These are now mated together. The spindle's not going to be walking around. Now I can cut my notch. To cut my notch, I wish I had another person here to record this part from behind me so it's a little bit more visible. But to carve my notch, I bisect the hole, meaning I find the midpoint, and I make a mark on the front edge of the fireboard. That is my middle. Now I'm going to go off a little bit to either side and take out a chip. That's my guideline for my notch, or chimney, whatever you prefer to call it. I'm not going to make it any wider than that. I'm now going to take the guidelines down the side of the board, and again, that is my maximum width. It will not be wider than this. Now I'm simply going to remove material, thin it out, and make somewhere for that dust to collect. Now part of the notch did chip away as I was carving it, so I'm going to have to be cautious that I don't have much extra wobble, otherwise I might try to walk out the front of the notch. So I've got my notch roughly carved in. Now I'm going to take my spindle, put it in the hole, and this is something I figured out myself as far as I'm aware. I was demonstrating hand drill at a museum in Arizona, had a few failed attempts in a row that definitely should have worked in my mind. So I put my spindle in my fireboard, flipped upside down, and saw, oh, I don't have much spindle contact with my dust. To show that, here you can see maybe there's just a tiny bit of the edge of the spindle showing at the bottom of the notch. You want to see about a third of it. That way you can have the maximum spindle to dust contact. So I'm going to carefully carve out a little bit more. I like square notches in my fireboards. A square notch, again, will give you maximum spindle to dust contact. So in my mind, it is superior to a triangular notch in that you have more contact. Real quick, I'm just going to carve the bottom of my fireboard down a little bit more because it's a bit thick. I like my fireboards to be about as thick as my finger. So before I go any further, waste energy trying to fill a very tall notch, I'm going to take the whole board just a bit thinner, save myself a little bit of effort. There, that's good. Alright, so I'm going to check again now that I adjusted my notch, and I've got much more spindle visibility. Probably can't see it very well on video, but that's okay. Now, one more thing I'm going to do before I start working this is I'm going to take the spine of my knife and rub it through that notch, and that'll help smooth it down. That just helps prevent any extra snag that you might get from the dust falling into the notch, and then a rough spot from where you were carving. It kind of catches on that rough spot, and then your coal gets stuck. It might fall apart. So just removing that. And then just cleaning up that edge one more time. Now, before I do anything else, I'm going to get some cedar bark to make a tinder bundle with. Stay with me. Alright, so I just went up to one of the cedars behind me and grabbed a big long strip of bark, actually a lot more than I needed. One thing worth noting, I peeled this bark off the tree. My knife did not touch the tree. I'm not using any kind of tool because I don't want to cut the sapwood. If you're just peeling the cambium layer away from the tree, you're not going to hurt it. The second you break past the cambium and get to the sapwood, that's when things get dangerous for the tree's health. So, if at all possible, do not penetrate the cambium layer, or past the cambium layer. If you can use a dead tree, even better, because then it doesn't really matter. These behind me are all live. I've used them for years. They're all perfectly healthy. So, I'm going to have to use my knife, I guess, to separate some of this off. Alright, so now to process this bark into a tinder bundle, I'm going to separate the hard bark from the soft, meaning the outer bark from the inner. Easiest way to do this is to fold it and take off the harder bits. So right here, this is all a little bit softer. This will be able to be processed down a lot better. You can see how this is all just in layers. So pulling apart the layers is a first step. So pull apart several layers of it. That'll make it softer and more pliable. Again, getting rid of any hard bark, because the hard stuff isn't going to help you. Then I like to fold up the bark and start just grinding it in my hands against itself. And you can see that already is becoming a lot more soft and fibrous. All this dust coming out of it is a good indicator that this bark is very dry. Frankly, if there wasn't dust, I'd be kind of concerned and might not want to use this. If you're allergic to dust, that kind of sucks. But a lot of this is just dust from the bark itself. It's not like the dust in your house, so might not have that big of an effect on you. But again, as I'm grinding this, it is getting soft and fluffy and fibrous. And it already has turned from just a bunch of rough bark to a soft, fluffy bundle. So I'm going to process this bit a little bit more. Alright, that's about perfect. So now that is super fluffy, super soft. That'll accept a cold no problem. Last thing I'm going to do with my tinder bundle is I'm going to get one more strip of bark, a nice soft pliable piece, and I'm going to wrap my tinder bundle. The reason for that is with loose bark bundles, it's easy for them to, like it already has just after I set it down, it's easy for it to kind of pull apart. It loses a little bit of density. It's easy to get around that just by holding it a little bit tighter in your hands. But what I prefer to do is wrap just loosely. It doesn't have to be super tight, but just wrap my bundle, my tinder bundle. Just wrap it, tuck in any tail that it might have, and now from here, I'm using my thumbs to open up the target area, the middle, the very softest bit of bark. That's where I'm going to be dropping my coal. So, as a recap, we have our fireboard of cottonwood root, we have our coal catch, also cottonwood root, and we have our spindle, horseweed. Here in Kansas, and a lot of the Midwest and Southwest, this is one of the best material combinations you'll get. Now, that's not to say this is the only thing that'll work, by any means, because that would be a straight up lie. I've used a whole lot of different stuff. In the Southwest, in Arizona specifically, if you're in a riparian zone, meaning you're along a stream or river that is there all year long, it's always got flowing water or water very, very close to the surface, areas where you'll see cottonwoods and willows growing, there's a plant called mule fat or seep willow. That and horseweed, in my opinion, are the absolute best spindle materials I have ever used. Also in the Southwest, you'll find more yucca plants. Yucca is a biennial, I believe is the term, plant. You've probably seen it around your town. It's planted ornamentally all over the country. But they have really nice flower stalks that are really soft. They make good spindles, they make good fireboards. And there's one species of that yucca called Sorrel. And Sorrel makes a fantastic fireboard, especially when paired with a soup willow spindle. As long as you get that Sorrel at the right time in its decay. If you get it right after it's started to dry out, it's going to be way too hard. If you get it 2-3 years after it's been dried, it's going to probably be a little too soft. You got to find that perfect middle ground. If it's been dead for about a year, then that stock is probably pretty prime. Anyway, back to what we're doing right here, right now. So, we've got our set, we've got our tinder bundle. Now that is left to do is to make a coal. There are a bunch of different stances for this. The one I showed earlier, I was just sitting here. That's not my preferred stance, for the reason that, as you can see, I'm a pretty thin guy. I don't really have big arms, very strong musculature. So sitting is, for me, not the ideal stance. What I prefer is kneeling, similar as to what you would do for a bow drill, or using a kneeling board or something to hold down the fireboard for me. Back in Arizona, I had a small Tramontina machete, a 12-inch one, that I would use as my kneeling board, and it was fantastic. So right now, I'm just trying to find something to pin this down. Sandal's too floppy. Let's try this piece of cottonwood branch. That's pretty good. Alright. So now, I can be kneeling over it with both my feet back behind me. I can get a lot of force over the top of this spindle. So I'm going to start with just smooth, even passes. Right now I'm doing what's called floating. I'm moving one hand up and one hand down at the same time to keep one position on my spindle. I like to do this to warm up. There are some people that are very good at floating that can spin out a full coal without making a single pass down the spindle. I don't do that. I just go till I see a wisp of smoke, which I see. So now I'm going to pick up my speed and pressure. Alright, I think I'm about through that hole on my fireboard, but I do believe I've got a coal. So I'm going to pump my spindle in the hole, and yes, I do have a coal. I can tell because smoke is coming from my punk. I'm going to tap it free. Feed it all the rest of the punk from the fireboard. Now I can just take a second to breathe. Something worth noting. With pithy spindles, it is very common to have a nipple form in the fireboard. Because the center of the spindle is very soft, it wears away much faster than the walls. As you can see, it hollowed itself out. No big deal, just break out that little nipple. Now this hole is fully used. I can't get another coal out of it, so it doesn't really matter either way. I'm going to set that off to the side, grab my tinder bundle. Now I'm going to bring my tinder close to my coal so it's got not very far to travel. As you can see, it's smoking nice and strong. It's already coalesced, it's all stuck together. So from here, tap it carefully into my fireboard. Now we're going to move over to a fire pit because I don't want to just drop this in the grass. This is a fire pit that my brother and I built here at this spot, I don't know, a month ago, because the main fire pit is a little bit too big and used pretty frequently, so it's pretty full. Alright, so from here there's two methods to bring this to flame. One you'll see most people do is just blowing on it. Which obviously works very well. What I like to do is start it by blowing on it, and then I wave it in figure eights. This gives it a constant airflow. So my breath isn't the only source of oxygen. And just like that, we have a little fire. And sometimes cedar bark can be a little bit stubborn, so the flame keeps putting itself out. No big deal. This is burning very well, so I can bring this to flame quite easily from here. Tip it on its side so that the fire can start to burn more bark. We'll just set it down. And blowing it to flame in the little fire pit. Just like that. So, hope you guys like this video. I really like making it. I don't really plan on doing much video stuff in general, but this was a lot of fun. Hand drill is my favorite skill to teach, and doing it like this in front of the camera is a great way for me to see what I'm doing right, what I'm doing wrong, and how to improve my technique. So I didn't mention it at the beginning of the video, but I was out here gathering horseweed for an event called Rabbit Stick. It's a primitive skills gathering held in Idaho, right outside of Rexburg, every year, and it has been since the late 80s. It is where the best of the best gather from around the nation, and people even come from other parts of the world. Teresa Kemper, if you're familiar with her, she was on Alone, I believe season 8. She is a very, very skilled Stone Age technologist. She specializes in tanning and utilizing animal hides for clothing, gear, equipment, etc. David Holliday, one of my personal mentors, he's the guy that trained most people you see on the bigger TV shows, like Alone, back in the day, Naked and Afraid, Dual Survival, Cody Lundeen, and Matt Graham. Both of them were trained by Dave. Cody himself also goes to Rabbit Stick. If you are interested in Rabbit Stick, look it up on Google, just Rabbit Stick Primitive Skills Gathering, or go to backtracks.com and you'll be able to learn all about it. Or go to YouTube and look up what is Rabbit Stick. There's a video by Tyler White. The page on YouTube is TJack Survival. He's got a few videos from a couple different years of Rabbit Stick. Very worth checking out if you're interested. So I'm gonna go ahead and pack up and get back home, take a shower, because I'm stinky and sweaty and dirty and want to feel clean. So guys, if you got anything out of this, let me know. I think I'm gonna probably upload this to my YouTube. So yeah, if you like it, let me know, and feel free to share. Just make sure you're giving credit. Thanks guys, have a good night.